Henry Nouwen, Monasticism, Beauty, and Contemplation. In 1974 and in 1979, Henry Nouwen had 2 extended visits, each approximately half a year, to the Trappist Abbey of Genesee in New York. Why a Trappist monastery? One reason is that Henry Nouwen considered Trappist monk Thomas Merton his spiritual mentor. Proof of his lifelong interest in Merton and his spiritual thought can be seen in many of Nouwen's books, including Thomas Merton, Contemplative Critic, Genesee Diary, and A Cry of Mercy, Prayers from the Genesee. Nouwen was ahead of the academics when he compiled Thomas Merton, Contemplative Critic, which is an insightfully appreciative introduction to the life and writing of Thomas Merton. At the time of its publication, there were few commentaries on Merton, quite the opposite now. Merton's unexpurgated journals had yet to be published, along with his numerous letters and essays. Nouwen had turned to Merton because he needed guidance in his prayer life, and Merton had already established himself as the modern commentator par excellence on prayer, particularly contemplation. On more than one occasion, Nouwen said that all Christians are called to become contemplatives. Quote, "We are called to be contemplatives, that is, seers, men and women who see the coming of God," end of quote. Nouwen often felt, however, that he had failed at prayer. By failing, he meant that he had not offered sufficient time to his prayer life. Thus, he had not established a greater intimacy with God. In his Genesee Diary and in his other diaries, he frequently chastised himself for his self-preoccupation and for his wasting of precious time in egotistical pursuits. Nouwen's life was indeed much caught up in lecturing, writing books and letters, as well as teaching, preaching, and traveling. As a priest, he knew he was far too busy, too involved in worldly affairs, and because he possessed sufficient self-knowledge, he decided to do something about it. He had met Trappist monk John Eudes Bamberger at the Abbey of Gethsemani, where they both bonded because of their mutual interest in psychology. Bamberger would become a psychiatrist, and Nouwen would write the groundbreaking book on pastoral psychology, The Wounded Healer. Bamberger later became the abbot of Genesee Abbey in New York. Nouwen, teaching at Yale at the time, wrote to his friend to ask if he could stay several months at the Abbey, living, praying, working, and eating as the monks did. Although such had never before been done, Bamberger and his community agreed to the experiment. Realizing that his time at a Trappist monastery was a unique event, Nouwen maintained a diary of his time there. When he later published it, it was an enormous success, catapulting him from the second tier of spiritual commentators to the first tier, thus commencing his life as one of the 20th century's most important and influential spiritual voices. Nouwen was anxious but also excited when he arrived at Genesee, fully cognizant of why he had chosen to go there, to learn how to pray. To some people, his learning how to pray may sound puzzling. Should not a priest know how to pray? With Nouwen, it was a matter of relearning how to pray, and the Trappist life is devoted to ora et labora, prayer and work. Nouwen had to face the fact that because his life had become so frenetic, he had little space or time for prayer, and what better place to find both than a monastery? Let us take a closer look at Nouwen. He talked too much, primarily because as a professor he had to advise his students, but he also became their friends, socializing with them. As a priest, he also had to respond to the myriad of people who sought his spiritual counsel. Furthermore, he had a penchant for accepting every invitation to lecture that came his way, and there were many. As for solitude, he was rarely alone, his office overflowing with students, visitors and friends. In fact, people constantly surrounded him. He was social to a fault, confessing in his diary that he craved people's attention and approval. He also admitted his desire for fame and gradually realized that his ego was getting the upper hand in his life. The only way to address these distractions was to distance himself from them. This is the background that caused Genesee to come into his life. His decision to live at Genesee Abbey was wise. There, he slowed down and spoke only when he had to. He followed the monks' liturgical hours of vigils, lauds, none, vespers, and compline. Rising at 2 a.m. for vigils was not an easy discipline for him. He also worked. He helped in baking bread, washing raisins, moving huge stones for the building of the Abbey Chapel. He was now not the center of attention, just another monk working and praying, the latter being most important. He learned by experience what he had theoretically learned from Merton. Prayer lies in listening to the still, small voice of God. In order to listen, he had to be still and silent. The two hardest lessons Nouwen had to learn, because he was a man always on the go, a man who rarely stopped, to borrow the cliche, to smell the roses, or, to quote Gerard Manley Hopkins' more poetic dictum, to enjoy the world, quote, charged with the grandeur of God, end of quote. In his poem, Archaic Torso of Apollo, the poet Rilke, whom Nouwen admired, exhorts his readers, quote, you must change your life, end of quote. And in his novel, The Notebooks of Malte Laurits Brigg, he also writes about the utter importance of, quote, learning to see, end of quote. At Genesee Abbey, Nouwen was fully engaged in both endeavors of transformation and seeing. He had never before worked so hard physically. He was awkward in so many ways, burning himself while baking bread, straining himself moving stones to help finish the Abbey Chapel, back-breaking work. For the first time, he also drove a truck, a frightening event. For like his mentor, Thomas Merton, Nouwen was inept at operating machines. The kindest description for both men is simply to say that each was a klutz. One of his main activities was to write his diary. For Robert Frost, writing poetry was a, quote, clarification of life, end of quote. It was also true for Nouwen. Quote, for me, writing is a very powerful way of concentrating and of clarifying for myself many thoughts and feelings. Once I put my pen on paper and write for an hour or two, a real sense of peace and harmony comes to me, end of quote. What he had not realized, what he had not likely realized, was that his writing was also prayer, because it demanded his absolute attention. Simone Weil, the French mystic, writes, quote, absolutely unmixed attention is prayer, end of quote. By giving himself to labor and to writing, Nouwen in both activities was actually praying. He had put his ego on the back burner of his mind, involving himself in a new life by shattering old patterns of habitual living. Former good habits, he continued. He still read Thomas Merton. In fact, he dreamt about Merton. In one of his most moving passages, he describes an experience similar to Merton's famous Louisville vision, quote, when I walked into a flower shop to buy some white and yellow chrysanthemums for friends in town, I felt a deep love for the florist who, with a twinkle in his eye, told me that chrysanthemums were year-round flowers, not bound to the seasons. I felt open, free, and relaxed, and really enjoyed the little conversation we had on flowers, presidents, and honesty in politics. End of quote. As his dream suggests, Nouwen was clearly becoming a more sensitive seer. He saw another person in all his uniqueness, what Gerard Manley Hopkins would describe as a person's inscape. He sees and listens to the florist, accomplished by an act of pure, unmixed attention. In his dream, by offering his complete attention to the florist, Nouwen was indeed praying, for by being selfless, he allows the Christ within himself to shine forth. Genesee Diary reveals that Nouwen daily prayed. Throughout his diary, he records many occasions when he recited the Jesus Prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me. A powerful verbal prayer. And Nouwen was a master of verbal prayer. To understand the importance of verbal prayer in his life, we need only read his book, A Cry for Mercy, Prayers from the Genesee, written during his second prolonged visit to Genesee Abbey. His prayers reflect upon issues that still concerned him. I'm now going to read a series of sentences I lifted from that book. Let me recognize you, Jesus, at the virginal point in the depth of my heart. I call you, O Lord, from my quiet darkness. Show me your love and mercy. Is this going to be the time when you give me insight into the chains that bind me and the courage to throw them off? Oh Lord, I am self-centered, concerned about myself, my career, my future, my name and fame. Every day I see again that only you can teach me to pray. Only you can set my heart at rest. Only you can let me dwell in your presence. Help me in this struggle to make you the center of my inner life. Give me grace of prayer. Show me clearly and convincingly how I am fooling myself, and give me the strength to follow this insight. Excuse me, I just need a drink here. At Genesee, he was graced with the insight, quote, to live a spiritual life is to live in the presence of God, end of quote. It was a truth that was boldly underscored for him while he was reading Brother Lawrence's The Practice of the Presence of God, a book of letters composed in the 17th century. While reading Brother Lawrence, Nouwen was pierced with the insight that to pray, one need not be housed in a church or an oratory, that we all possess within us an oratory of the heart, quote, wherein to retire from time to time to converse with God in meekness, humility, and love, end of quote. For Nouwen, this realization was a tremendous breakthrough. We know from Abbot Bamberger that Nouwen had given serious thought to entering the monastery. But he had counseled Nouwen that he was not suited for monastic life, but for an active one of writing, teaching, preaching, and spiritual direction. Nouwen accepted Bamberger's evaluation, but he had already learned an essential truth. He need not enter a monastery to pray to God. He could do so in the oratory of the heart. He understood that God abides within each of us, and we need only turn our attention toward him. At Genesee Abbey, Nouwen recorded in his diary a remarkable talk delivered by a priest from St. Bernard's Seminary in Rochester. He stated that to convince someone of the beauty of stained glass windows created by Marc Chagall, he had to see them from inside the synagogue. His comments moved Nouwen because his mother and father had owned a small painting by Chagall of a vase filled with flowers standing in front of a window. When they had purchased it, Chagall was not yet famous. Naaman was haunted by the visiting priest's insight. Beauty lures people into the synagogue, the gathering place for God seekers. As we shall see, beauty would lead Naaman into deeper contemplation. From youth, he had already possessed an acute aesthetic sensibility. He played the piano. He loved the life and work of his fellow countryman, Vincent van Gogh, and he was also a talented, insightful writer on modern spirituality. Paintings in particular imprinted themselves upon Naaman's mind and soul. It is not surprising, therefore, that Naaman would become entranced by Russian icons. In one of his most popular books, Behold the Beauty of the Lord, Praying with Icons, Naaman offers meditations on 4 famous Russian icons: the icon of the Holy Trinity, the icon of the Virgin of Vladimir, the icon of Svenigorod, and the icon of the descent of the Holy Spirit. These icons inspired Naaman to pray. At first, he fixed his attention upon the image. Because the images are beautiful, Naaman needed no prodding to pay attention. He absorbed their beauty and artistry. The images then gradually spoke to his heart. At first, his experience was aesthetic, but he then realized that the source of the icon's beauty is God. Naaman writes, quote, "An icon is like a window looking out upon eternity," end of quote. Notice the movement. First, there is an image to focus upon. Second, the image speaks to the viewer. Third, the image leads to meditation. Without realizing it, gazing upon the image becomes prayer. The next stage is movement from meditation into contemplation, imageless prayer. Contemplation is a form of prayer that many people find most difficult not only to understand, but also to practice. Most Christians prefer verbal prayer, reading the Psalms, reciting the Our Father, saying the Rosary, and the prayers of the Mass. Meditation entails thinking and visualization. Thus, many people begin with a phrase from a prayer book or the Bible. Contemplation, however, is more difficult because the intellect cannot help. In fact, during contemplation, it is temporarily absent. To explain this aspect of contemplation is nearly ineffable. But Naaman's experience with Rembrandt's painting of the Return of the Prodigal Son will help us better understand how one moves from meditation into contemplation. If the Genesee Diary is considered Naaman's breakthrough book in which he was so utterly candid and self-revealing, then The Return of the Prodigal Son, a story of homecoming, is likely his masterpiece, because it eloquently reveals how far he has come as a contemplative. The time between his second visit to Genesee and the publication of The Return of the Prodigal Son is 13 years. The story begins in 1983, when Naaman was visiting L'Arche in Trosly, France, a community for the handicapped founded by Jean Vanier. While conversing with a friend, Naaman's gaze happened to fall upon a large poster of Rembrandt's painting, The Return of the Prodigal Son. At the time, he had just returned from a grueling 6-week lecturing tour through the United States. He writes, quote, "My heart leapt when I saw it. After my long, self-exposing journey, the tender embrace of the Father and Son expressed everything I desired at that moment. I was indeed the Son, exhausted from long travels. I wanted to be embraced. I was looking for a home where I could feel safe. The Son come home was all I was and all I wanted to be. For so long I had been going from place to place, confronting, beseeching, admonishing, and consoling. Now I desired only to rest safely in a place where I could feel a sense of belonging, a place where I could feel at home, end of quote. Nouwen had indeed been searching for a home. He now found one in a painting by Rembrandt. One cannot find a more beautiful home than Rembrandt. It invited Nouwen into its chiaroscuro, into its narrative, into its mystery. Nouwen was hooked, reminding us of Simone Weil's belief that beauty is God's snare to lure us to him. Nouwen writes, quote, "It's beautiful, more than beautiful. It makes me want to cry and laugh at the same time. I can't tell you what I feel as I look at it, but it touches me deeply," end of quote. Little did Nouwen realize at the time how profoundly this painting would change his life. After a while, having only the poster of Rembrandt's painting proved insufficient. He had to see for himself the original painting housed in the Hermitage Museum in Russia. Traveling to Russia, he received permission to gaze alone for 4 hours upon the painting. A most unusual and gracious accommodation from the Russian curator. Such is the fruit of fame. What did Nouwen behold in Rembrandt's shadows? We can never know. What we do know is that, excuse me, what did Nouwen behold in Rembrandt's shadows? We can never know. What we do know is that the painting before which he sat opened him to the mystery of his own life, and more important, to the sublimity of God's love and compassion. If one examines the painting, it is a miraculous admixture of light and shadow, with shadow more abundant than light. The viewer cannot help wondering, what does the shadow contain? Something? Everything? Nothing? We know that in representational painting there is no light without shadow. Here is what a contemporary painter has to say about chiaroscuro, Rembrandt's technique of light and shadow. Quote, "This way of using paint utilizes bright, rich, opaque masses of light and dark, transparent, ominous shapes of shadow, void of information, as a tool to convey the struggle within one's own self, struggles of the mortal and the divine, the sublime and the void, the cerebral and the sensual. Through this struggle and search to find balance in these things, we find meaning in our existence. My inspiration is the search for that meaning," end of quote. Nouwen, like all viewers of Rembrandt's painting, is drawn to the light. And where is the focus of the light? It is upon the Father's hands resting upon his Son's body. The hands are our means of touch. Was Nouwen longing for touch, he who was the child of a loving mother who followed a child-rearing book that discouraged mothers from touching their children, for it would spoil them? Or was Nouwen longing for divine touch, the touch of Christ? Or had it something to do with his conflicted relationship with his Father, whom he seemingly could never please? At first, it was surely the beauty of Rembrandt's painting that snared, to use Simone Weil's word, him, for it is one of Rembrandt's greatest works of art. Nouwen was then moved by the tender scene of the father's embracing his lost son, now returned home. The imagery, of course, is based on Christ's parable. Touched by the artist's rendering of the parable, Nouwen moves from an aesthetic experience into a meditation on the meaning of Christ's parable. Through meditation, Nouwen loses himself both in the painting and in Christ's words. His meditation gradually allows him to enter into contemplation, an egoless state illustrating Christ's dictum, quote, "By losing yourself, you will find yourself." And all of this is in his book. You'll find all of this in his book. Okay? Available in paperback. You find it all there. Let us hear Nouwen's actual experience. He's in a room at the Hermitage in Russia. He's sitting alone in a chair, gazing upon Rembrandt's painting. He writes, quote, "The painting was exposed in the most favorable way on a wall that received plenty of natural light through a large nearby window at an 80-degree angle. Sitting there, I realized that the light became fuller and more intense as the afternoon progressed. At 4 o'clock, the sun covered the painting with a new brightness, and the background figures, which had remained quite vague in the early hours, seemed to step out of their dark corners. As the evening drew near, the sunlight grew more crisp and tingling. The embrace of the Father and Son became stronger and deeper, and the bystanders participated more directly in this mysterious event of reconciliation, forgiveness, and inner healing. Gradually, I realized that there were as many paintings of the prodigal son as there were changes in the light. And for a long time, I was held spellbound by the gracious dance of nature and art." End of quote. The first line of the next paragraph in this book is a telling line. Quote, "Without my realizing it, more than 2 hours had gone by when Alexei, the god, reappeared." End of quote. The contemplative experience is a timeless moment. William James, in his groundbreaking book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, offers 4 characteristics of the mystical experience: ineffability, noetic quality, transiency, and passivity. These also apply to the contemplative experience. For the contemplative, time flies. Or rather, it comes to a stop. It is the timeless moment T.S. Eliot so eloquently speaks about in the 4 quartets. To be lost in beauty created by a man inspired by Christ's parable, as well as to be lost in the beauty of Christ's actual words, was a transcendent experience for Nouwen. He was with God alone, not in any geographical place, but within his soul where God abides. What Merton, borrowing the term from Massignon, who borrowed it from the Sufis, describes as the Pointe Vierge, the virgin point. Merton writes, quote, "At the center of our being is a point of nothingness which is untouched by sin and by illusion, a point of pure truth, a point or spark which belongs entirely to God. This little point is the pure glory of God in us." End of quote. Do you have a Kleenex, Sandy? Thank you. So let us summarize Henry Nouwen's contemplative experience regarding Rembrandt's painting. Are you with me? Okay. Didn't fall asleep? All right. First, he is snared by a glimpse of the poster's beauty. Second, he moves in for a closer look. Third, he surrenders himself to the painting by an act of, quote, absolutely unmixed attention. Thus, according to Simone Weil's definition of prayer, he is praying while gazing upon the painting. Fourth, he must view the original painting in Russia and travels to the Hermitage Museum for a private 4 hours gazing upon the painting. Finally, he loses himself in the beauty of the painting and in Christ's spiritual message, and by losing himself, he has entered the state of prayer we call contemplation. Allow me again to quote Simone Weil. Quote, "In everything which gives us the pure, authentic feeling of beauty, there is really the presence of God. There is, as it were, an incarnation of God in the world, and it is indicated by beauty." End of quote. Let us now briefly consider why Rembrandt painted the return of the prodigal son. He was at the end of his life. He had lost everything, all his possessions, and most of all, his family, to death, including his beloved son, Titus. Surely the story of a father and a lost son resonated with the artist. Rembrandt had once been a son, and he had also been a parent who outlived his wife and children. Therefore, Rembrandt deeply understood love, and based upon his knowledge and experience, he offers to the world a painting, one that serves as his greatest tribute to agape. Agape, A-G-A-P-E, Greek, for unconditional love. It means unconditional love. A Rembrandt scholar writes, quote, "Thus Rembrandt shows us that he has learned that it is a humble thing to be a man. From this time, the beautiful ceased to be an end in itself for him. He realized that beauty must serve something higher, namely truth, or else it is in danger of becoming an empty shell, falsifying the reality of life. If beauty accepts this part, it acquires a new substance through which the eternal shines." End of quote. Like Shakespeare's King Lear, both Nouwen and Rembrandt have become God's spies by taking upon themselves through beauty what Shakespeare calls the mystery of things. Let me now conclude with a comment from our late Pope John Paul II in his letter to artists. It serves as a summary of what I've just suggested to you tonight. Quote, and this is the Pope speaking now. "In order to communicate the message entrusted to her by Christ, the Church needs art. Art must make perceptible and as far as possible attractive the world of the Spirit, of the invisible, of God. It must therefore translate into meaningful terms that which is in itself ineffable. Art has a unique capacity to take one or other facet of the message and translate it into colors, shapes, and sounds which nourish the intuition of those who look or listen. It does so without emptying the message itself of its transcendent value and its aura of mystery. The Church has need, especially of those who can do this on the literary and figurative level, using the endless possibilities of images and their symbolic force. Christ himself made extensive use of images in his preaching, fully in keeping with his willingness to become, in the incarnation, the icon of the unseen God. We can be thankful to both Henry Nouwen and Rembrandt, the first offering us beauty through his words and insights, the latter through his genius as a figurative artist. So that's the end of part one. Okay? Now, this is the famous, it doesn't do justice to it. I want to show, you have to see the painting. You have to see it. You don't always have to see things to believe them, do you? But you have to see this painting because this certainly doesn't do justice to it. So I have a little segment of Sister Wendy Beckett, PBS pop icon. How many know Sister Wendy? How many of you know her? Okay. Actually, she's a very erudite woman. I had the opportunity to see her here in Boston when she came to speak at the Gardner Museum. I remember that night very vividly because all the Boston elite were there to see this tiny little nun from a contemplative order in England. And all the tables were laden with hors d'oeuvres, and other tables had champagne and wine. And I thought, this is remarkable. They've all come to see this little nun. And then we all went upstairs to the music salon and waited for a sister to arrive. And she was late. And the tension began to build and build. And then she finally appeared, and she got a standing ovation. And then she began to speak. And I don't remember a thing she said, because I was just fascinated by the personality. She is very charming, very erudite, has a great love of art, and she has something very important to say about Rembrandt's painting, The Return of the Prodigal Son, which we're going to play. And then as soon as we're over with Rembrandt, just shut it off. Then I'm going to ask for time to talk about the painting, the poster, okay?
The splendor of the city has to be experienced to be believed. And it's a happy irony that because of communism, so little has been changed here. At its heart lies the Winter Palace and the Hermitage, originally a private museum for the Tsars. Its grand scale is completely overwhelming. 400 rooms, 14 miles of corridors, and nearly 3 million objects on display. It doesn't seem possible that we have a whole hall here full of Rembrandts, but fortunately, I have no hesitations to which is the one I love best. This is Rembrandt's Prodigal Son, and I think you could take this picture anywhere in the world, and people would respond. It's the story of a father who had 2 sons. And the younger son said to the father, look, I don't want to wait till you're dead for my money. Let me have it now. And the father gave it to him. And the son went away to a far country and he lived it up. Spent all his money, and then the country was in a recession. Nobody would help him, and he had to take a job looking after the pigs. And then he started the long journey back. Rembrandt has shown the states to which the son has been reduced. His poor feet, so travel state, and the shoe worn out on one side, fallen off on the other. And he's gone, but you can see it's still got the embroidery around the top, one of his glad rags, which now is a rag. And here you see the father and the son lost together in this embrace. And I love the way Rembrandt has made the father's cloak come out like a little wound, protecting the son. And then, at the side, you see the third actor in the story. Remember the 2 sons. This is the elder son. He's stiff and narrow and upright. His eyes are fixed disapprovingly upon this little tableau. He's a man of law, as opposed to the father of love. Rembrandt makes it absolutely clear where he stands. He stands on the side of parental love, of embracement. And that intimacy must have had a special poignancy for Rembrandt. Remember his own children, most of them died. He just had one son left, Titus, a very good son, by the way. And Titus too died before his father. So here you have the picture of father's love, painted by a father, and it's impossible to look at it and not be moved.
Okay, I think we have to go more deeply into this. Do you mind if we go more deeply into this, into the painting? Okay, because I think there are certain things I have to point out to you in order for you to appreciate. I'm not very good at this. This is a new toy for me, so I got to be careful not to shine it in anyone's eyes, I was told. Okay? There are certain things about the painting that you should be aware of. All right. All right. Here we have the Father. Now, a lot of people don't realize it, but the Rembrandt painted the Father as blind. In the original parable, the Father ran toward his Son. Do you remember that? He ran toward his Son. He was so happy to see him. And the Son tried to express his mea culpa, but the Father didn't want to hear anything about any mea culpa. Okay, he was just so delighted. My son who was dead is now alive. He was glad he was alive. So he's blind. So therefore the hands on the Son become more important, don't they? Because they become the means of expressing his love. And his love is unconditional. Okay? And the strange thing about the hands is that one hand, this hand here, is the hand of a man. This hand here is that of a woman. Now, why would he do that? Why would he do that? Anyone have any idea about that? Huh? That a father can be mothering, just as a mother can be fathering. Carl Jung says that we are psychologically androgynous. So the man has within himself the anima, okay, the inner woman, if you want to call it, and a woman has the animus, you know, the inner man, that we are androgynous. So if you ask for, well, where is the feminine in this picture? Well, there's a lot of femininity in this picture. Okay, and the Father himself expresses femininity right here, the hand, right there. It's right there. Okay, now I didn't see these figures myself the first time I looked at this poster. There is a figure here. Can you see it? Right. That I think is a woman. The critics are not sure who she is. She could be the wife of the elder son. All right. There is speculation that I think she's far too young to be the mother of the prodigal son. There is a woman up here too. Can you see it? Well, if you want to come up and look, you can, but it's there. Okay, so it's up there. All right. Now, I want to point out to you the condition of the prodigal son. This is before the party. Remember, he said, "Kill the fatted calf. We're going to have a party. Dress him in fine clothes, and put rings on his fingers and sandals on his feet. We're going to have a party." Well, this is before the party. No party has started yet. The only indication of a party is up here. There's an engraving up here. You can barely see it, of a figure. It's an engraving playing a flute. It's the only indication of partying going on. All right. This is the son returned, and as Sister Wendy said, you know, it's almost like a womb, is it not? All the lines of the Father are curves. Look at that. It's all curving down, curving down. It's almost as if birth is being given. Well, birth is happening, is it not? He is being reborn. He is being reborn in the love of his father. Now I want to say something about that agape that I talked about. Agape is unconditional love. What is unconditional love? What is unconditional love? You want nothing. There are no strings attached. There are three kinds of love. There is philia, friendship, Philadelphia. Eros, the word erotic comes from that. Eros. And then there is agape. There are no conditions. Okay? Which explains why when he tries to express his act of contrition to his father, I'm very sorry for what I have done. And what he has done is very serious. What has he done? He went and asked for his inheritance and took it, and he wasted it. He lost everything. But when he asked for his inheritance, that really means he wants his father to be dead. Because when do you usually get your inheritance? When someone dies. Okay? So there is that oblique, indirect wish that his father was dead. So he goes off and he wastes, he loses everything. The only thing he did not lose was this. And you can barely see it. A scabbard and a knife right there. That, huh? Yeah. It's a scabbard with a small knife in it, which a father gives a son. It was the last thing he held on to, that he didn't lose, because it symbolized his sonship. That he did not want to lose. He lost everything else, but he did not lose that. Can you see it at all? I mean, is it that? It's right here. You see it? Okay, thank you. It's right there. It's the only thing he didn't lose. Now, this is what he's wearing. Sister Wendy calls the glad rags, okay, the party rags. Well, now it's more like, the critics call it, it's more like an undergarment. That's all it is. Look at the feet. This sandal is off, and according to the critics I've read, the feet are scarred, they're wounded. Over here, the heel is gone. Look, see? You can see the heel of the foot. So here we have a man welcoming his son back, so happy that he is alive. And why does he not want to hear the act of contrition from his son? Because there is no ego there to be hurt to begin with. He doesn't need forgiveness. Okay? He loves his son. That's the end of it, right there. He loves his son. I don't need to hear you say, I'm sorry. I don't need to hear you say mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, for those who remember the Latin Mass. Okay? He doesn't need to hear it. He's just so happy that his son is alive. Unconditional love. No strings attached. Now the eldest son has a big problem with this. Okay, look at him. Here he is. Here he is. Notice, they are on a lower platform. He is standing higher. And notice the stance, how straight, where he's all curves. He's all curving lines. He is as straight as an arrow. Look at the staff he holds, the rod he holds right there. There's a rod. I'm sure Rembrandt knew when he was painting this painting. I'm sure he knew about the proverb, about sparing the child. It's spare the rod and spoil the child. I'm sorry. And there's another one too about the ignorant man gets the rod on his back. Okay, so there's the rod, and you almost get the feeling that he'd like to use it on his brother, because he says to his father, why are you doing this? You've never given me a party. You've never shown any appreciation. And I've been the good, dutiful son. Okay? You've never done... And of course the father is taken aback by that. Why, everything I have is yours. You know that I love you. You don't... Do I need to have to tell you that? Okay? So we have an elder son here who is filled with anger, filled with jealousy, wondering why he hasn't received this kind of an expression of love. Okay? Two different sons. However, I see hope in this figure here. I see hope. He is wearing the color red, the father. He's wearing the color red. Red is symbolic of love. So is the son. Red cloak. There is the potential with the son to learn how to love, because he's gazing upon agapetic love right now. What is he looking at right now? He is looking at love. He is looking at the love of a father for his son, a son who wasted his life. Okay? And Plato says, you become what you behold. So there is, I believe, there's great hope for this figure, who is, many people say he's justifiably angry. He has been the good son, the dutiful son. He has a right to be angry. This one went off and lost everything. Okay? He knows the darkness of life, the prodigal son. That's why all this darkness here is so important, because that's where he was. He knows about the dark night of the soul. Okay? He knows what it's like to be alone. He knows what it's like not to have any friends. He knows what it's like to be homeless. He knows what it's like to be hungry. He knows what it's like to feed the pigs, because that's the only work he could find. And then he realized the pigs were eating better than he was. He knows all of that. So when he goes home, really, is the first impulse, a desire for forgiveness? No, it was pragmatic. He had nowhere else to go. He had nowhere else to go but home. Okay? So he knows the dark side of life. Now, you might say, well, what's going to happen in the future? Is he going to turn out to be, is he going to be a better son? Well, we don't know. We don't know. We do know that he knows the shadow. He knows the shadows of life, the dark side of life. He's aware of it. Okay? He's aware of it. Now, these figures are probably relatives. This figure here, probably a relative. Okay? And I think I've gotten all the figures. One here, the woman, another woman, a man, the eldest son, the father, the prodigal son. Okay? Now, are there any questions about the painting? Yeah.
Why did Nowlan identify so strongly with this prodigal? What had he done in his own life?
Well, that's the interesting question, because he was very successful in life. But he didn't make a lot of money. He went into the priesthood. And the father, I think that was the problem. I think the father didn't want his son to be a priest. Yeah. So on some level he always felt, but he identified with all three. It's a good question. Thank you, Jack. He identified with the prodigal son, okay, because he had such a poor relationship with his father. He identified with the eldest son because he was the eldest son in his family. There were three kids. There was Nowlan, his brother, and his sister. All right, so he knew what it was like to be the eldest son. All right, and there's a lot of responsibility on an eldest son to prove himself. He has to be a model for the other children, etc., etc. If you're an eldest son or daughter, you know what I mean. Okay. All right. And he identified, Sue Mosler was the one who said, you identify with the prodigal son, Sue Mosler was a friend of his, and you identify with the eldest son, but you've got to learn to identify with the father. Because you are a father, you are a priest. You've got to learn to identify with the father. Okay, pater. That's exactly what he is. He is there to be a spiritual father, to his students when he was teaching, and later on when he became the pastor at Jean Vinier's place in Toronto, I think, L'Arche. Is it in Toronto, isn't it? I'm pretty sure, my memory. I'm pretty sure it's Toronto. Okay, where he worked with the handicapped children. Okay? All right. Are there any other questions about the painting? Prodigal Son. So, in conclusion, I would say that what Rembrandt is well, he's at the end of his life. And he's lost everything. He lost his own son a year before he painted this. He lost his other children. The only child that was left was Cornelia, the Titus's daughter, his granddaughter. He lost his first wife, and then he lost the two women he had lived with. Okay, he lost them, and he loved them, both of them, very much. And then he lost two daughters. Each daughter was named Cornelia, which reminds me of King Lear, because what happened to Rembrandt is very similar to what happened to King Lear. King Lear was stripped of everything by his children. He lost everything. Remember, he opens up the play, which of you does love me most? And one daughter gets up and gone her own. She says, "Oh, Father, you mean more to me than life. You mean more to me than my eyesight. You mean more to me than health. You mean more to me than beauty. There are not words to express the love I have for you." Oh, and that pleased him. So he gave a big chunk of his kingdom to her. Then the next daughter, Regan, had to speak, and she didn't know what to say, so she just said, "Take everything she said and double it, and that's how much I love you. Double it." And then we go to the third daughter, the one that he truly loved the most. Parents should not have favorites, but they do. Often they do. And that is Cordelia. I always see Rembrandt's daughter's name is Cornelia. It's only one letter off. Cordelia. And it derives from the Latin word cors cordis, which means heart. By the way, I didn't point that out. If the father had not been bending down, the head would have been against the what? The stomach. Right? If he was standing up straight, the head would be at the stomach. But bending down, where is his head? It's against his heart. Right against his heart. And notice the head, by the way. It's almost shaved like a baby's head. You know, it reminds you of a newborn child. Anyway, King Lear comes to Cordelia, and what say you? Nothing. And he says, "Nothing will come of nothing. Nothing will come of nothing. You better say something. You want a portion of this kingdom? You better say something." But she won't bite. And that's the secret of the whole play. Because something does come out of nothing. Just as with this young man, he loses everything. He's stripped of everything. He's with the pigs. He has nothing left. He's down to zero. He's down to nothing. And it's by moving through zero that he's reborn. It's when you move through zero, you're reborn. Which confirms Christ's comment, in losing yourself, you will find yourself. In losing yourself, you will find yourself. Okay? That's why I emphasize the act of attention so much in my lecture. What is attention? You lose yourself in looking at something else. If you give your complete attention to another human being, what are you doing? You forget yourself. When you give your complete attention to another human being, if you really look at them, if you really, with all of your being, look at another human being, you are saying to that person in that moment in time, you are the most important person in my life in this moment. There's no greater gift that you can give another human being. Try it. Sometimes it makes people very uncomfortable. I used to be in the presence of a Cistercian monk He was a friend of mine. I used to talk to him. He was an old man. But in the beginning of our friendship, he made me very uncomfortable. Out at Spencer, the Abbey in Spencer, St. Joseph's Abbey. And I would go back to my room and I said, why does he make me so uncomfortable? And I finally figured it out. He gave me his complete attention. In that moment in time, nothing existed in his life but me. What a wonderful gift. I used to think he could see right into my soul. He probably couldn't, or maybe he could. I don't know. But what a wonderful gift. Attention. Simone Weil thinks attention is the sine qua non of the spiritual life. Without attention, there is no spiritual life. Because if you can't lose yourself in attention, you're not going to have a prayer life. It won't happen for you. Attention is very, very important. So, he has to move through zero. King Lear had to do the same thing. He had to lose everything. He had to lose his kingdom. He lost his 2 daughters. Cordelia got banished. He banished Cordelia to France. The one who truly loved him, he banished her to France. Then his daughters took everything away from him, took his knights away from him, took his power away from him, his land. He had nothing. And then he entered the abyss of madness. He went through zero, but in the end he did finally come out. He came out of it. He came out of it a wiser man, a more whole man, but he had to experience the dark night of the soul to get there. He had to go through the zero. I used to tell my students, he had to go through the zero of his crown that he wore on his head. That crown is a zero, and he had to move through it. And sometimes that's the only time we learn anything, is when we suffer. Sometimes we only learn when we've gone through the dark night of the soul. And and quite frankly, I can't condemn the prodigal son. I can't condemn him, really. He took a chance on life. He said, give me my money. I'm going to go out and experience life. Okay, he experienced the dark side of life. Okay? But there is a dark side of life. Okay? And we all, in some way, experience it. Well, he got a big chunk of it. All that darkness in here symbolizes that. He knows about the dark side of it. He knows more about life than he does. He took a risk on life. The son played it safe. The elder son, he stayed home. He doesn't know the world. He does. Now, will he learn? We don't know what happens afterwards. What kind of a man did he become? Did the love of the Father transform him so completely that he became a complete and whole human being, a good person? Or did he fall back into bad habits? We don't know. We don't know. Were they able, the brother and the other son, to come together as brothers? We don't know. I hope they did, but we don't know. I'm optimistic because I see the red cloak on the elder son. Red is the color of love. I think he would grow to love his brother and forgive him. But that's what I want to believe anyway. Okay? That's what I want to believe. All right. But to get back to that whole idea of attention, it's so important. Especially in our world today, because it's the big thing in education. Attention deficit disorder. What? Attention deficit disorder. He's not learning. There is a syndrome that is legitimate. It is legitimate, but in many cases, it's the result of someone just not paying attention. You have to pay attention. It's an act of will. You pay attention. All artists ask you, this painting asks you, it shouts to you, look at me. Rembrandt, he's dead, but he's shouting to you right now, look at my painting. I have had an insight into life. I want to share it with you. And the only way I can do it is through painting. Nouwen had insights into life, and the only way he could do it was through words. Others have insights, they do it through music. or they do it through stone, through sculpture. But they've had an insight, and because all beauty and art is altruistic, or it should be, you want to share it with other people. So all art shouts, pay attention to me, look at me. And it's easy to do. It's easy to do when you think about it. All you have to do is look. Look attentively. Your eyes are closed, you open them and you look. You really look. With all of your being. And if you do it with all of your being, you forget yourself. And you become like the observer and the observed become one. The observer and the observed become one. You forget yourself. It's a wonderful experience. You've had that, haven't you? You've been doing something, and then all of a sudden you look at your watch and you say, oh, my God. It's like what happened now, and 2 hours went by. Where did the time go? You were so absorbed in something, time flew, or as I say, it stops. Yeah. You had a question?
No, I just wanted to think about, isn't it Willie Loman who says attention must be paid?
The Willie Lomans of the world. Absolutely. Attention must be paid. It's one of the great lines in modern literature. Yeah? Thank you. Absolutely. Attention must be paid. The Willie Lomans of the world. Willie Loman is the main. Yeah, Willie Loman is the main character. There's a good film of it with Dustin Hoffman. Is that his name? Dustin Hoffman? Yeah. It's a good film. I watched it. Lee J. Cobb made it famous on Broadway, but Dustin Hoffman made a wonderful film out of it. It's a wonderful play. I used to teach it. My kids liked it, actually. It's a good play. Yeah.
And there was one other thing besides the love. Red is the color of blood.
Yes.
That's
Yeah. Well, the blood relationship, certainly. Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, the blood relationship. This is a family. This is a family. Yeah. And family dynamics, well, we won't go there. We won't go there. That's another lecture right there. Okay? Yeah, right. Okay? Anything else you'd like to say about the painting? Or questions about Nouwen? Anybody have any questions about Henry Nouwen? Or any comments about what we talked about, monasticism, beauty, contemplation? You do understand that journey now. Okay? I mean, contemplation is something, I don't know if I've ever really experienced contemplation. I don't know. I've meditated, I know that, and I've certainly said many verbal prayers in my life. We all have. But contemplation, I don't know if I don't know. Have you?
I have an experience when I was a student teacher here. We were asked to go and find ourselves experiencing nature, experiencing God in nature. So I went for a walk around the mountain where I had been walking for 20 years, so I thought I knew every stick and stone on this path. And I was tired to start with. And I was getting near the end of the path, and I sort of, nothing had happened. And just as I thought nothing had happened, I looked to my right and I saw a grove of trees at the foot of what looked like a little mountain, and which I'd never seen before in all these years. And the trees, there were trees growing off the side of the mountain, the trees were growing straight up. In other words, they were rooted, and they came out, 6 inches, and they went straight up.
Yeah.
And the leaves were caught, the autumn leaves were caught behind the trunks of the trees. And at the base of this grove of small trees, the sun was coming down and lit up the whole place, and it was God. It was God, and someone else went off by now.
Right.
So it was just at that moment in time.
Right.
An intense experience.
Yes. Oh, that's marvelous. Yeah.
Lost in that place.
Yeah. Well, many people spend a lifetime for what T.S. Eliot calls hints and guesses, or glimpses of divinity, and I can't say I've had a mystical experience. It might scare the hell out of me. I don't know if I have one. A real, true mystical experience. I don't know what would happen. And to feel the presence of God, to actually feel it, that's an extraordinary thing. Okay? And that's why people go into monasteries and abbeys and live holy lives, hoping for that. I do think we all have glimpses of it here and there, especially through beauty. Because I believe St. Augustine is right, that the source of all beauty is God. So therefore, every time that we appreciate beauty, whether it's the beauty of nature, or the beauty of art, or the beauty of another human being, we are in an oblique way experiencing God. Okay? It's not the direct experience of the mystic, it's an indirect experience, but it is an experience. And we treasure those moments. Okay? We treasure, for a lifetime we treasure them. Okay? So he can reveal himself through beauty. That's the great belief of Simone Weil, anyway. And I highly recommend her. She's very interesting, and she is a true mystic. She had several interesting mystical experiences. Now, Father Nouwen does not write about any mystical experiences. I've read everything that he's written, and I looked for that. I didn't find. The most moving thing was in his sabbatical journey diary, where he describes the death of Adam, the handicap boy he took care of, man actually. And if you can't read that without weeping. It's so beautiful. I think that was the most profound experience of his life. I have read everything by Merton. I see no indication of a mystical, he never claimed it either, by the way, but I looked throughout the work of Thomas Merton for an example of a mystical experience. If he had one, and it's very like Merton to do this, if he had one, he didn't write about it. He wouldn't share it. There were certain things about Merton's life he would not share, that he felt that were meant for only him and God. So you don't know everything. Nouwen wasn't like that. Nouwen was very transparent. I mean, he just poured himself out on the page. He's naked. He's there naked. In all his craziness and his neuroses, it's all there. His nervous breakdown, it's there. It's all there. But with Merton, he was crafty. He was crafty. Okay? Any other questions? Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you.